Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And today, not only am I in the Shenandoah Valley, which I love to be, I am in Lexington, Virginia, and I am in front of what I am told to be the one and only home ever owned by Confederate Lieutenant General Thomas Jonathan Jackson, better known to the world as Stonewall. And I gotta tell you, he is my favorite Confederate general, and I am very happy to say that when I called up here and asked if I could do a interview with someone there about the house, they said yes. So in a few moments, we're going to be going inside that beautiful home and find out a little bit more about Stonewall Jackson. But a couple of things I got to take care of first. One, please support this channel as best you can. Give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Also, I'm told that there's no filming allowed inside the house. You can come and visit with your camera and take still photos, but moving pictures, no. So I really can't give you a tour of the home, but hopefully the curator will tell you about the house and more about Stonewall Jackson's life. For the most part, it's going to focus on Major Jackson and his time living in the house and his time teaching at VMI, which is just a stone's throw up the road. So, without any further ado, let's go on inside. All right, folks, as promised, I am inside the home of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. If I'm excited, it's because I am. I am here with Major Grace Moyer of the Virginia Militia?
Yeah, part of the Virginia Military Institute.
Sorry, part of the Virginia Military Institute. My mistake. I do apologize. By the way, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
And she's going to be our main speaker today. And she's going to tell us about this home. We're going to focus on the life of Major Thomas Jonathan Jackson before the Civil War, his life here in the house, and we're going to talk about the Major himself. And, well, again, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really do appreciate it. So, can you tell us a little bit about the house before we get into the life of Major Jackson?
Absolutely. So the house, the brick portion that you see from the outside was built about 1800, 1801, and then the stone addition was added about 1845. So when Jackson moves into the house in 1858, everything that you see would have been what he would have seen in the house, or of the house itself.
Well-preserved house.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep. And so Jackson comes to Lexington in 1851. And when he moves into the house in early 1858, he actually starts out as a boarder in the house, and then he buys the house later that year on November 4th.
Okay, must have been a proud moment for him.
Yes.
Anybody who buys a house, you know what we mean.
Oh, it's an exciting time, and
Yes.
it's something that was so important to him because he felt like he couldn't properly entertain family and friends and couldn't properly make his family comfortable until he had a home of his own.
Okay, understandable. So what's his plan? To have a big family, wife, couple kids?
Yes, he wanted a very big family, and we think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was orphaned at a very young age.
Right.
He loses a sister and his father at 2. He loses his mother by the time he's 7, and then his older brother Warren dies at the age of 21. And so he suffered through a lot of trauma as a child and didn't get to have that experience of being at home with your family. Right. And we think that that really carried on into adulthood for him.
Absolutely.
So he buys the house. It's a rather large house for just Thomas and his wife Anna. And Anna actually even complained about that the house was too big for them. But he had full intentions to fill the house with children. He wanted lots of children, loved them. There are great stories of this stern military man who all of a sudden he'd be on the floor playing with children and letting them climb on his back so he could be a horse for them.
Does he get his wish?
So not for a long time. So he marries his first wife, Ellie, in 1853, and she dies 14 months later in childbirth after giving birth to their stillborn son. So for Thomas Jackson, Ellie's the first person he ever loved. He He actually even didn't know he was in love with her. When he first fell in love with her, his friend D.H. Hill actually had to explain to him, this feeling you're feeling is love. So he loses his first love and his son in one day, his whole family. And then a few years later, he marries Anna. And so he's thinking that they're going to be able to have this family together, and he's very happy with Anna. And in 1858, early 58, she gives birth to their daughter, Mary, who we now believe was born in this house.
Okay.
And
Excellent.
it's a wonderful time for them. They're very excited. It's Anna's first child. She makes it through beautifully. The baby makes it through beautifully. And Thomas writes to his mother-in-law, who they named the baby after, explaining that Anna's well, the baby's well, they've named Mary after her, and that he cannot wait until Mary is writing letters to her namesake. And only a few weeks later, she dies. And she dies of jaundice, which is so easily cured today. And it is a devastating blow for Thomas and Anna, probably particularly for Thomas, because this is now his second child he's lost.
Second loss, yes.
And so the first few months they're in this house, they're in mourning. And to make matters worse, Anna's sister Eugenia dies a few weeks after Mary Graham. And Eugenia had been like a twin to her. They were very close. And fortunately for them, they have the wonderful distraction a little later in the year of their nephew, Thomas Arnold, coming to visit, and Thomas is named after his uncle.
That's great. That's nice.
And it was a wonderful time, though it's funny because there are letters where Thomas is giving reports back to his sister about how her son is doing, and one of them, he writes something along the lines of, "Can you please tell him to stop picking his nose?" So not something you would expect to see written by the famous General Stonewall Jackson, but it just goes to show they're having the same life experiences that all the rest of us have.
Right, yeah.
So they get the opportunity to spend about 8 months with Thomas and see him go to school here and be parent figures to him during that time.
Excellent.
And it's not until 1862, during the war, that Thomas's final child, Julia, is born. And he does get to see her, and she's brought to Jackson during the war by Anna. He gets to be there when she's baptized.
Excellent.
And then he's wounded at Chancellorsville.
Right.
And he dies when she's about 6 months old.
Okay, does Julia at least live to adulthood?
She does. Unfortunately, she dies shortly before her 27th birthday.
Oh.
But she had 2 children of her own, so there are actually a lot of Jackson descendants today.
Excellent.
And so Anna actually spent a lot of time with her grandchildren. She helped a lot in their raising. So we're very fortunate because Jackson's granddaughter, whom was pretty much raised by Jackson's widow, when our museum was formed in 1954, she was the vice president of the memorial.
Excellent.
And so a lot of the information we know comes straight from her.
Okay.
And she was able to donate family letters, a lot of furniture to the house that belonged to the Jacksons. So we're very fortunate that we have that strong connection.
Okay. I often hear about Jackson's idiosyncrasies.
Yes.
I'm sure some of them is fact and some is fiction. Can we dispel some of the, separate the two?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of misconceptions about Jackson's idiosyncrasies. A lot of them are written by people who didn't really know him well. Some were promoted by early biographers who didn't do quite enough research.
So is it true that he was constantly sucking on lemons?
So that is a really big misconception that was started by one of Jackson's earliest biographers. There is a record of him during the war of somebody seeing him with a lemon.
A lemon.
A lemon. Yes.
A lemon. Okay. No, gotta make it clear because a lemon all of a sudden becomes. I read one report he always had a supply of them on him.
Yes. Okay. So that's not actually true. And of course, getting citrus at that time would have been difficult anyway, particularly during the Civil War. And so from that one report, it grew into him all the time. Okay. And so that's why primary sources are always so important to go back to and never just trust the word of somebody.
What was his favorite fruit?
He loved peaches.
Peaches, okay.
Peaches were his favorite, and he really loved most fruits and vegetables. He had his garden here in the back of the house, and he also had an 18-acre farm on the outskirts of town.
He did have some stomach ailments. That is correct.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
He so what they called it was dyspepsia, which at that time that covers a wide variety of ailments. They didn't quite have all the knowledge that we have today. We think it's most likely that he suffered from very severe heartburn, and if you've ever had very severe heartburn, it's very, very difficult. So he was strict with his diet. He ate very plain food. So he, if he had bread, it was very plain bread, more stale. He really wouldn't put butter on it.
Right, I heard that story. Supposedly it tasted so good, he wouldn't eat it. Well, one story I heard too is that guy would be upset because it tasted so good.
Right, yeah, and that part's not accurate.
The other thing I read too, I don't know about the God part, but whiskey. He liked whiskey, so he didn't drink it.
Yeah.
He's kind of into self-abuse. I mean, he sees stuff that tastes good, and he won't eat it because...
Yeah, he was, that level of discipline in him is absolutely amazing. That discipline and self-control, which would be good for a lot of us. I love food. I'm very, very addicted to food.
Love chocolate.
Oh yeah. But he...
And ice cream.
Yes, ice cream is great. I'm sure he would have loved it if he could have had it readily available all the time.
Yes.
But he was very careful, and he really tried to eat foods that were going to be as beneficial to his health as possible, cause the least bit of problems for his stomach and his ailments, and particularly with alcohol, just with the risks involved. If he knew he liked it, there is a story of him after he graduated West Point of him getting drunk with some of his classmates. So we do have a record of that. So it says a lot about somebody who can recognize that about themselves and say, well, I'm not going to partake in it.
Okay. So he had a lot of self-disciplines. Yeah. Did he expect that of others?
So yes and no. So he, for example, with his cadets, he never asked of anybody what he wasn't willing to do himself. So he taught by the standard of the day, which was memorization.
Right.
And so he would require the cadets to learn a section of text. At that time, you were expected to really more learn the material on your own, and then in class it would kind of be gone over again. But the section that the cadets would be required to learn, he would memorize as well, and actually it would be done right here at his desk.
This desk?
Yes.
Is this the desk?
This is the desk that was here in the study. I'll move back a little bit so you can see it better on the camera.
I'm standing where Stonewall Jackson would have stood. Wow. Okay.
It is incredible. And if you notice, we have the desk raised. Jackson actually wrote to his wife. She couldn't have it down. And he said that he had raised his desk so he could work at it.
I gotta show you folks this. Let's just pan down here on the camera a little bit here. They got this up on blocks. There we go.
So we have these wood pieces here, and so we don't know exactly how Jackson had his desk raised, but this is one possibility, especially if it was a last-minute decision. And this was strictly so he could work at it standing as opposed to sitting, which he believed was much more beneficial to his health. And of course, all the health experts today say it's better to stand for at least 50 minutes out of an hour at your desk. But Jackson did it because he believed that it helped keep his organs in proper alignment.
Yeah, okay, one of his idiosyncrasies. Is it true that the pepper made his right leg ache? That was another one.
Yes, so that is another myth, and we believe that myth is probably true. So he did believe that. I haven't seen any evidence that would suggest that something like that would occur, but he did avoid the black pepper.
Okay. So
back to the cadets though.
Yep.
So he would memorize his lessons here at the desk. And then in class, he would call on cadets to recite sections of that text, and he himself could repeat that word for word. But if a cadet messed something up, if it was a list of things and they didn't get it in the order that the list had it in the book, it would be counted as wrong.
he did improve as a professor, though, as time went on.
He did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he wasn't, and of course we have to be careful because the standard of the day, that was the standard of the day.
Yeah.
And Jackson was not a trained professor. The only requirements VMI was looking for at the time for that position, which he taught natural and experimental philosophy,
right.
Which is today's physics. They wanted a Virginian, which he was.
Okay.
That part of Virginia, which is now West Virginia, was still
Right.
Virginia. They wanted a graduate of West Point, which he was, and they wanted somebody who had experience fighting in the war, which would have been the Mexican-American War. He was promoted during the war 3 times for bravery. So those are the requirements. They weren't like, hey, have you had any experience teaching? You know, what's that been like for you? So he came, he taught. First complaint ever lodged against a professor at VMI was against Jackson. So it kind of shows he wasn't the greatest when he first started, but what we see is through his 10 years there, he does improve as professor. And you see a lot of complaints at the beginning that you don't see at the end of his tenure at VMI. And at the end, you see other professors and other cadets saying that he really tried to help the cadets and work with them to get them to understand their subject matter.
Excellent, excellent. So another thing I'm told is that Stonewall Jackson taught his slaves to read the Bible when teaching people, slaves to read would have been illegal. Is that any truth to that?
Yeah, so there is some truth in that. So at the time, it was illegal. It wasn't necessarily illegal to teach slaves how to read.
Okay.
It was illegal to have a gathering that the sole purpose was to teach slaves how to read.
Okay.
So the laws kind of got a little weird. The closer you get to the Civil War, they get to be a little more strict. But you could teach the slaves in your own home how to read. So Jackson actually instructed his wife Anna to teach George and Cyrus, who were teenage boys at the time, how to read and write. And a lot of that may have had to do with the fact that he would send them out on errands, and they'd even leave town to do errands for him. So knowing how to read and write would have been very beneficial to the household. But we do also have a record of a friend of Jackson's who said at one point he did say that he wished all slaves knew how to read so they could read the Bible for themselves.
Right.
Because again, he's a very devout Christian.
Very devout, yes.
And so he knows what the benefit would be if they would be able to read the Bible for themselves.
Okay.
And so actually one of the interesting things too is George, who was one of the slaves here in the house, he doesn't die until 1920. We know from census records that he could read and write. He was a very prominent member of his community, and he was very active in the church that he went to and helped to form a school for African American students in his community. So doing that in the house went on to benefit George after he was freed from slavery.
Excellent.
But specifically too, to extend on with Jackson and his involvement with teaching, he formed a Sunday school at the Lexington Presbyterian Church where he was a member for both freed and enslaved individuals. And a lot of people believe that he did teach all of the students who attended how to read.
Okay.
However, we don't actually have any real solid proof of that.
Okay.
What we do know from his sister-in-law is that there were older individuals who were in the class who already knew how to read. And so they would read the Bible for themselves in the class. But she said the class was primarily taught orally. And so she never has any records of anything later on saying that they taught all of them how to read and write.
Okay. 2 more topics. One, you often hear of Jackson just being like dour and sour. And
Yes.
did he actually have a social life that was enjoyable? Did he get out and dance? Did he go to some of the cotillions at the time?
So Jackson actually loved to dance. He learned how to dance in Mexico. He went to a lot of balls. He loved. He actually loved his time in Mexico and the culture there. He actually considered staying in Mexico.
Really?
But he, when he became Presbyterian at the time, Presbyterians really frowned on public dancing. So he didn't dance publicly, but he would dance in the privacy of his own home.
Okay.
He really enjoyed the polka. And so he would dance in his own home. And he did have a very active social life in town. He also had a very playful side. And a lot of people don't think of the stern General Stonewall Jackson as somebody who might play a prank on anybody. But one of his favorite things, he loved to hide behind a door and wait for Anna to come into a room. And he'd jump out and scare her, which I love doing that to my husband. So I'm like,
so you can relate?
Yes.
Okay, you can relate.
I don't think Anna really enjoyed it. But we do know one time he went a little too far with that joke in that he Came home, he's in his full military regalia, and he hears her coming, hides behind a door, and he has a sword, and he pops out, waving it above his head, and it frightened her too much. And so he immediately put down the sword, picked her up in his arms, and from what we can tell, he never did that again.
Okay. So the war comes.
Yes.
And he's gonna leave. He's taken the what would become the Stonewall Brigade.
Mm-hmm.
Does he ever return to this house once the war is up?
So tragically, he doesn't. So on Sunday, April 21st, there is a knock at the front door, and he's told that he's going to have to take cadets and march them to Richmond for training, and he's being called into active service. And they already knew Virginia had seceded, so they were kind of waiting for this to happen. And so he leaves the house, he goes up to VMI, he makes some preparations, and then he comes back home for a very quick breakfast. And then Jackson's final moments in the house, he takes Anna into the bedroom, and they kneel and they read from the Bible. And they read from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, which is a chapter that talks about the promise of an eternal home in heaven. And I can only imagine what they're both thinking, particularly Anna, who's about to send her husband off to war, wondering what home is he going to return to. And so they finished reading from that chapter, and Anna said that he offered up a very tearful prayer for both his safety and for her safety. And Anna walks him to the door, and he heads out the door, and he never sees his home here in Lexington again. Jackson was a very big believer that during wartime, you did not take leave to go home, that you had a duty to stay and serve until the end. So he only fights in the war for about 2 years before he's wounded at Chancellorsville by friendly fire. And fortunately, Anna is able to be at his bedside before he dies. She's the one who's actually going to tell him that on that Sunday, May 10th, that he's going to die. He gets to see his daughter before his death again, and then he dies that Sunday at 3:15 in the afternoon. And so when he returns to Lexington again, it's on the 14th of May, the day before his burial here in town.
Right.
And that was a very long and stressful trip for Anna, because she has to accompany his body to Richmond, where he lays in state. Then she has to accompany his body down the river, and people are coming out to see and say goodbye to this.
Him, yeah.
Yes, he was very well loved, and actually even in the North very well respected. And his burial was not supposed to be till May 16th, and the evening of May 14th, she said, I can't do this another day. We have to put him to rest. And so he's buried in the cemetery next to their daughter, Mary.
Okay.
And it was a very difficult time for Anna. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about Anna is when they first moved into this house, she hated the home.
It's a beautiful house.
I love it. It's great, but she can't bear to part with it, and she hopes to return to the house. She's never able to come back to Lexington to live, but she kept the house until the early 1900s.
Okay.
And then she turned it over to the United Daughters of the Confederacy, who turned the house into the first hospital for our community.
Oh, no. Okay. Excellent. Did not know that.
Yeah.
This house served as a hospital for a while.
Anna felt that that was a fitting way to, the only reason she was willing to part with the house, because the home that had been so meaningful to her and Thomas would be put to a good use and serve the community.
Okay. So who's the caretaker of this house now? Who's the owner?
Yes, we are very fortunate that the Virginia Military Institute owns and operates the site. So we don't actually get state funding, but they are here, and they do a lot of to help us at our site. And we're actually part of one of 3 museums that VMI owns and operates.
Okay. So if people want to come and visit, where are we located? How can they find out more information about this house, website?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in visiting, we are in Lexington, Virginia, and our website is www.vmi.edu/sjh. So I really hope you all can come. The tour experience, you can do self-guided, or you can take a tour with a guide, and you get to learn all about Jackson's life and the man before he became the legendary Stonewall.
Yes, and if you do come and visit, you really need to go up the road to the VMI Museum to see Stonewall's favorite warhorse, Little Sorrel. He's been, from what I understood, they took basically his hide off of him and put it on a plaster life-size replica. So you're actually seeing Little Sorrel for what Little Sorrel was, how high he was, and
Yep, so we still have him, and he was always a very beloved horse, and today he still is.
Yep, we're doing an episode on Little Sorrel coming up. So, Major, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I can't believe it. This is great. This is great. All right. I was told, thank you very much for this, that I can go and do some quick panning of the rooms to give you an idea of what this beautiful house looks like. And for Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Thank you. Please, if you're ever in the Shenandoah Valley, try to make a stop here to the Stonewall Jackson house. Thank you very much again. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I'm in the study. Once again, this is the desk that Stonewall would have been standing at to prepare his lessons. There is the spittoon, fireplace, map. Beautiful, beautiful. And I guess Stonewall sat in that chair from time to time. This is the foyer of the Jackson home. If you had come in through the front door, this is what you would have seen. Okay, I'm now currently in what would have been Major Jackson's parlor. Again, he left this house when he, spent most of his time here as a major in the U.S. Army. Love the marble top table. And from what I'm told, this is a piano that his wife played. Apparently Stonewall was not very musically inclined. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, if I sound excited, it's because I am now in the bedroom of Major Jackson. There's his bed. I gotta tell you, him and I have similar tastes. Marble top tables. And this, from what I'm told, is a reproduction of his major uniform. This would have been his uniform while he was a professor at VMI. Okay, there's his washstand, dresser, and closet over here. And of course, he has his own stove to stay warm in the wintertime. Can't believe it, I am in General Jackson's bedroom. I didn't think we were going to be able to do this, folks, but you're getting a tour of the house, and I'm getting a personal tour. This is incredible. All right, let's move on to the next room. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are in Major Jackson's. That's what he was when he lived here. This is his dining room. This is the original dining room table that Jackson would have had his meals on. This is incredible here. I'm so grateful that we get to do this here, take you on this little tour. Also a fireplace here in the dining room. And I am told that the carpet is a reproduction but of an original pattern. Same thing too with the wallpaper here, reproductions of original. And this is a couch that Jackson bought at an auction. And I also want to point out before we move on that this teapot here, I am told, belonged to Major Jackson's mother. And here is a Bible that belonged to Jackson's sister Laura. It is opened to Corinthians 2, chapter 5, the very chapter that he read with his wife before leaving for the war. Also, I want to point out here that if you read a biography on Jackson and it points out that him and his sister did not get along once the war came, that is false. New evidence does point to the fact that they did keep in touch during the war. All right, folks, this is a part of the house that Major Jackson would not have spent too much time in. This is the kitchen. This would have been the working domain of his house slaves. However, he did do some of his own canning here, and I hope you could see it. This here is, well, didn't belong to the Major, but it is a reproduction time period of a indoor stove. This would have been modern technology, and this is where the house slaves would have prepared the meals. All right, I am now in basically the enslaved quarters here. You see one lone rope bed, but with a trundle bed. But probably a number of slaves would have spent the night here. This is also a room for storage. There's a crate over here addressed to Major Jackson in Lexington, Virginia. So this would have been the sleeping quarters and storage area for some of, well, what we call Jackson's house slaves. A couple things I could take away from that visit there. I knew this already, but that trip to the Jackson house really enforced the importance of looking at primary documents. Biographies are great, and I highly recommend people reading them, but remember, authors are human like the rest of us. They're going to make mistakes, they're going to throw their personal biases in, and they're going to believe what they want to believe, you know. I mean, I for years been hearing about how Jackson was always sucking on lemons and carried them with him wherever he goes, and apparently maybe that incident only happened one time, but it got morphed. And that's just one example of, you know, what we learned today there. Also, I could take away, I think it was off camera, I was talking with the Major, and she said that, you know, Jackson, like Lee, went with Virginia, sided with this Confederacy because that's where their home state of Virginia went. You often hear stories about how Lee could not raise his sword against his home state. Jackson was the same way. When I started this channel, I really did have some mental debate on whether or not I wanted to film grave sites. I didn't know if that would be respectful or not. Didn't know if it was allowed, especially in like national cemeteries, but I already did the episode at Arlington National Cemetery, so I now want to take you into the Oak Grove Cemetery and show you the final resting place of Lieutenant General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the grave of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, his final resting place here in Lexington, Virginia. At the base of this monument is not only the general's earthly remains, but also the remains of members of his family, his wives, his children. They're all buried here. There's sort of a tradition, I guess you could say, that when you come here to leave a lemon, going back to the story that we talked about earlier, and there are a few lemons thrown on the other side of the fence here. You know, you can remove his statues, you can rename buildings and roads that are named after him, but it doesn't change the fact that this man created so much American history. History worth studying. History worth remembering. Even if you don't like the cause that he fought for, he did make American history. He is a part of American history. And one can only wonder what that American history would look like had he not been mortally wounded at Chancellorsville in May of 1863. For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.